Hello and welcome to another episode of Passive Real Estate Investing. As you know, I'm your host, Marco Santarelli, and it's great having you back on the show. Well, today I have a very, very special guest, someone who I've known for a very, very long time. I refer to him as one of the OGs, the original real estate investors from way back when. And I don't want to date him, but he's just got so much content and so much knowledge, and he's helped so many people. He's actually been the mentor and influencer for so many other great people that we all know and love in the real estate industry. So before we get to my guest, I just have to thank every one of you for making our show, Passive Real Estate Investing, one of the top rated and top ranked real estate and investing podcasts out there. We just get a lot of email every single day from people who want to be on the show or asking questions or wanting to do something with us, and it's very flattering. But we just don't have the bandwidth to do all that. But I wanted to thank all of you, our audience, for helping make this show what it is. And based on that, remember to subscribe. It takes you like 2 or 3 seconds to click that purple subscribe button, and just make sure you don't miss a weekly episode. And having said that, if you are feeling up to it, I welcome those ratings and reviews. So I read every single one of them. So please, don't hold back. Let me know what you think. Well, let's jump in with our guest today. This is someone who I've known about for, I'm going to say, 20 plus years. I have his book on my bookshelf. It's been there. It's one of my original real estate books, believe it or not. His name is Dolph DeRoos, and many of you probably know who he is or know of him. He's a very successful international real estate investor, and he's also a New York Times and Wall Street Journal best-selling author. He's written over 11 best-selling books, including the New York Times bestseller, Real Estate Riches. I'm sure you've seen it around. He has been syndicated on radio for 4 years or more, and he's been on over 4,500 stations, which is very impressive. And lastly, but not least, an interesting story. Dolph accepted a challenge to buy one house a week for an entire year without using any cash. Incredible story. Well, guess what? He failed. But he couldn't wait the entire year. He completed the 52 purchases of those homes in 9 months and then ended up writing the book called 52 Homes in 52 Weeks. So with that, Dolph, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you, Marco. Thank you for your kind words. It's my absolute pleasure to be here. And I know that we're going to get along just from the title of your show. And congratulations, by the way, on the success of this show. It speaks to what you do out there in the world. But the title, Passive Real Estate Investing, that is so close to my heart. That's kind of what I've dedicated my life to showing people how they too relatively easily can generate passive income. And, I want to give accolades to everyone who deserves them. And Warren Buffett is credited with having said, if you don't figure out a way of generating passive income, then you're condemned to working for the rest of your life. And so, with all that, it's my pleasure to be here. I just love hearing anything about real estate. If I come across a book, Marco, that I haven't read yet, I'll get it and read it, because my theory is if you can spend $30 of your money and 3 hours of your life consuming a book, even if it's not well written, but you get just one idea from that book, that idea could be worth $200 a month for the rest of your life. It could be worth $10,000 a month for the rest of your life. So you never learn less. And that's why I'm such an enthusiast of learning and reading and absorbing and watching videos and going to events. And you're a big proponent of getting messages out there in the world. So I want to congratulate you too for the success you're having with this show.
Yeah, thank you so much. And that just tells me something about you, that you're a perpetual student. You're always a sponge to learn more, and I can
Absolutely.
appreciate that. It's great because I have 10 rules of successful real estate investing, and my first rule, top of the list, is educate yourself. It's
Right.
knowledge is power, and it should be the first thing you do, because the investment in yourself goes a long way. And if you don't invest in yourself, obviously, you're going to fail in so many other things.
Absolutely. And I love that saying that if you think education's expensive, try ignorance. That's going to cost you a lot more in the long run. And,
That's how.
I speak with some authority on this because I spent 8 years at university getting a PhD in electrical engineering, not the easiest topic out there. And everything I learned in those 8 years has been made redundant by new technology. I'm so old, I learned the operating characteristics of valves. And I'm not talking about faucet type valves, but valve radio type valves. Well, they were replaced by transistors and transisted by integrated circuits, and then VLSI, very large scale integrated circuits, and ASICs application, all be made redundant. But what you might have learned 40 or 50 years ago about real estate, what a mortgage is, what equity is, what collateral is, it's still the same. You can learn in 8 weeks, probably 80% of all you need to know in real estate to generate passive income. And yet we
Yeah,
spend 18 years at school, kindergarten, lower school, middle school, high school, sometimes a tertiary institution, and not 1 hour is devoted to teaching what you teach on your podcasts. It's a
it's
shame.
sad. It's really sad. So much of what I spend my time on now is to educate people about money and investing and just financial education, financial IQ, if you want.
Right, right.
So that's great. So I guess that segues into the question, like what motivated you to get into real estate? I mean, obviously you didn't start off that way with your PhD.
No, but I did get started before I finished the PhD. I came from a family, Marco, that never had the chance to go to university. So it was indoctrinated in my sister and I that when you finish school, off you go to university. So off I went, didn't even know what I wanted to study. I didn't like the sight of blood, so medicine was out, and I didn't relish the thought of looking inside people's mouths all day, so I eliminated dentistry. And I quite liked the idea of law, but then you're limited to practicing in the country or jurisdiction where you study. And so I went through a process of elimination, and engineering is what I ended up with. But when I was at my first week at university, I looked around at me at the engineers who were they'd made it, the professors, the tutors, the lecturers, and it occurred to me that they weren't uniformly wealthy. Now, obviously, there are some extraordinarily wealthy engineers out there. The person who put all the Starlink satellites out into space, he's doing all right, I understand. But on average, it seemed to me they weren't doing that well. So I decided to make a study of the rich. I wanted to know, what do the rich have in common? Thinking, perhaps naively, that if I could identify 30 or 40 things and then emulate some or most of them, I'd have a good shot at being rich. And that's a good theory, of course. But the challenge was, Michael, I could hardly find anything that the rich had in common. It wasn't age. Bill Gates was pretty young when he made his first billion. It wasn't gender. It wasn't race. It wasn't religion. It wasn't country of origin. It wasn't whether you're an immigrant family or not, whether you were the firstborn or the lastborn or anywhere in between. I could hardly find anything that they had in common. I just knocked my own books off the table, but that's all right with my enthusiasm. But I found two things. And one of them is that almost without exception, the rich had integrity. Now, when I was 17 making the study, I didn't know what to do with that. But I've since learned a lot about integrity. I won't dwell on it. And the main thing being that integrity is not genetic. So
Hmm.
anyone can decide in a heartbeat. Someone listening can decide before I finish this sentence to increase their level of integrity. And to the extent that they're willing to do that, they'll find that more good things happen to them. For the simple reason that if you don't have integrity, then you end up hanging with people who don't have integrity. And if you live by the sword, you die by the sword, right? But back then, I didn't quite know what to do with that. So I filed that thought. The only other thing I found that the rich had in common is that almost without exception, the rich either made their money or they held their wealth in real estate.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, gosh, if that's all it is, I can do that. And it wasn't easy for me because I went around looking for my first property. I found what I thought was a great deal, and I had to go and fund it. And when I was 17, I looked about 12, which, when you're older, everyone wants to look younger, but it's devastating as a 17-year-old kid when you're trying to date a 17-year-old girl and everyone thinks you're 12. And even if they know you're 17, they don't want to be seen with you because you look 12. So you imagine this young looking 17-year-old going to the bank and putting forward a proposal to get funding. And the first bank manager I went to, he listened very attentively and carefully, and he waited for me to stop talking. And then he leaned forward and he said, "Are you done?" And I thought, that's an odd question, but I said yes. And he said, "This is a hoax, isn't it?" He thought it was a university prank. And I was devastated because here I was seriously trying to buy this property and he thought I was kidding him. But fortunately, I didn't give up. I didn't say, well, clearly I'm not cut out for real estate. Let me try my hand at something else. But I went to bank after bank after bank. And I think I had to go to 11 before one finally said, "I'll take a chance on you." And I would have much preferred to hear, "That's such a great deal. I'd buy it. Of course we'll fund it." But I was happy with, "I'll take a chance on you." So it was tough getting started. But it was because of this correlation between property and wealth. And, looking back, it's not so strange because when you look at just about any other activity that people are involved, think of inventions. I'm old enough that telex machines were around. They were being phased out and we were being introduced to fax machines. And I'm sure
Hmm.
that young people today, they may have heard of them. They've probably never seen one, let alone used one. But when they came out, they were revolutionary. You'll probably remember, Micah. You could take a document and insert it into this machine that Wisdom Bird, and a facsimile of it, a copy of it, could appear anywhere else in the world where there is a phone line. You'd pay the charge for an international phone call, of course. It was still not cheap, but it was a lot cheaper than sending a courier bag taking 3 days to get from one country to another. So we thought it was revolutionary. And I've got a friend, he was the foremost salesperson of fax machines in the southern part of the Netherlands, and he thought he was doing well. Well, he's not making a dime from fax machines now. They've been phased out, and all
Yeah.
these technologies get replaced. Even companies on the stock market, the companies that made fax machines, they're not doing well, certainly not in that division.
Yeah.
And yet, real estate is one of those things that has stuck around. Not only do we not have to replace our houses every 20 times because that was using old technology, they had copper pipes and now we use PEX, or they had clay sewage pipes and now we use PVC. No, they're still in use. You can go around and see properties that are 50 years old, 80 years old. Some even sell at a premium because they're in better parts of town. Occasionally, they'll get demolished and replaced by new ones, but then the value to the developer of that property is still high because he wants the land in that area. So my point is that real estate doesn't go out of fashion. And a really stark example of this is, for a while, I used to shoot videos. Now, this will sound odd because we're in a day and age where everyone has a smartphone. You shoot a video and you can post it straight away to YouTube. But not that many years ago, I'm talking about the early 2000s, there was no YouTube. There was none of these video streaming services. So I had a program, you'll laugh at this, but it was called Discussions with Dolph, and I'd shoot it every Tuesday morning, wherever I was in the world. And I ended up doing it from 27 countries. And I would start off by saying, welcome to another Discussions with Dolph. Today I find myself in Kota Kinabalu or wherever it's on the island of Borneo. I'd give a sentence or two about what makes it unique. And then I'd answer questions that people had emailed me about real estate. And the thing is, we had about, I don't know, 1,000 subscribers paying $50 a month. Many of you have done
Wow.
the math already. You can live off that, right?
Yeah.
But then an event happened in the world where my subscriber base linearly went to zero over about 6 months. And that event was the introduction to the world of YouTube. Why pay me $50 a month for 4 mere videos when you can get an unlimited number free of charge on YouTube free, right? So that's the background to that. But I shot one of these in Tokyo, Japan, in a suburb called Akihabara. And that's sort of the electronics capital of the world. And there was a stunning view of a scene. There was a railway line overhead, a big wide zebra crossing, and shops all around. And the reason I bring this up is the shop next to me sold Walkman. Now, you remember Walkman were those cassette players that you
Yeah.
put a cassette in. Japan had the latest in technology, auto reverse and track search and you name it.
Yeah.
And about 10 years later, I was back in Turkey and I thought, I'm going to shoot another one of my Discussions with Dolph videos here. So I went to the same spot. And there was still the store there, but they were no longer selling Walkman. They were out of fashion. It was CD players and those little Discmen, they called them. And the next time I
Yeah.
went back, they went out. It was MP3 players and what do we call them? The iPod at the time. And the last time I was there, which was only a couple of years ago, they weren't selling any electronics. It was anime accessories. And it occurred to me, the people who invested the time and effort and intelligence and brilliance into knowing everything about Walkman so that they could sell more, they're out of business. The Discman player, out of business. Any player went out of business because we now have our music collection on our smartphones. And now it's
Hmm.
anime. But the owner of that commercial premise that leased it firstly to the Walkman shopkeeper and then the Discman shopkeeper and then he was still there. He was still collecting rent. So the point is that real estate tends to stick around over the decades, over the centuries. The activities that are conducted there tend to vary. But one of the reasons, Michael, I'm still optimistic that property will be around for the long term is everyone, no matter how technology changes, no matter how our job titles change, they say that young people today will be doing jobs in 10 years' time that we don't even have descriptions for today. No matter what jobs they'll end up having, they'll still be sleeping in a bed somewhere or something akin to a bed, a futon. They'll still need
Yeah.
a kitchen to cook food. They'll still need a bathroom to do their ablutions. They'll still need a living room to watch whatever version of TV we'll have then, 3D or holographic or whatever. So we still need to occupy space. And that's why I have confidence that in the long term, real estate will serve its investors much better than investors of things that tend to go up and down because they're just fads.
Yeah, no, I agree. I like to say that everybody needs a roof over their head, a place to sleep, and a place to work. So real estate's
Right.
not going anywhere.
No.
Um, Very interesting. You've been around for so long. It makes me wonder, did you have way back when any mentors or influencers? I mean, it's not like there weren't real estate investors when you got started, but now with social media and the internet, like you can find information about real estate investing everywhere all the time. But back then it was like, I mean, you're talking about telex and fax machines,
Yes,
like,
I know.
did you
No, when
have
I
any
started,
mentors?
I didn't really. There were no books. I remember going to a warehouse in New Zealand, a book warehouse, and I bought a book by Robert Allen called Nothing Down. And
Yep.
it was very US centric. And by that, and I imagine many of your listeners, probably not all, are US based. So let's talk for a moment about a foreclosure. A foreclosure is a uniquely American phenomenon. It's not that banks don't take over properties where the borrowers of money have failed to meet their mortgage commitments. They take them, but they call it something different. Down under, it is a mortgagee sale or a mortgagee in possession sale. And sometimes it's called a redemption sale. And we have
Yep.
appraisers in this country, and everyone knows what an appraiser is. In other parts of the world, we have valuers. Here we have escrow companies, uniquely American. In other places, we have conveyancing solicitors. And a solicitor is not someone that is looked upon in a
Right.
shady manner because they're walking the streets. A solicitor is the name for an attorney. So
It's
my
attorney.
point
Yeah.
is, when I read this book, Nothing Down, the language, even though it was English, was pretty foreign to me because it was all American concepts. But I could relate to that, and I sort of I loved the book. I devoured it. I read it multiple times. And ironically, years later, about the 2000s, I met with Robert Allen. We went on tour together throughout Asia. And more recently, I've been working with him. We've put on events together and that sort of thing. So it's sort of gone full circle. But you're absolutely right. There were very few people to mentor you. Um, Luckily, I got on the speaking circuit somehow relatively young. And one of the mentors that I relish having worked with, I toured with him too, was Jim Rohn. And Jim wasn't even
Love Jim.
hardcore real estate, he was more mindset and philosophy. But I've come to realize that much of one's success in real estate is not just knowing the facts and figures, it is understanding the mindset. Because if you've got the wrong attitude, you're never going to make it. I'll give you an example. One of my favorite sayings, it's sort of my signature saying, is that the deal of the decade comes along about once a week. And here's my contention marker. If you don't believe that, if you think that by definition, and to be absolutely accurate, the deal of the decade has to come along exactly every 10 years, well, then when one of your listeners hears that you have done a great real estate deal this week, they'll say, well, there's this decade's deal gone, and I'll have to wait 9.9 years before we get an opportunity for another one. Whereas if, like me, you believe that the deal of the decade truly does come along about once a week, because you believe it, you open it, you look a bit more assiduously, you'll find them more regularly, and your belief that it comes along once a week will also be vindicated. And in that sense, we create our own reality. So, there was Jim Rohn and there were a few others, but there were very few. So you're right. But the thing is, when you learn through your own experience, that often is a better lesson than when you learn
Mhm.
secondhand through someone else's experience. So the trick is, yes, educate yourself, read a lot, listen to podcasts, watch videos, join investor groups and organizations, but don't use that as an excuse not to take action. At the end of the day, you'll only generate passive income when you close on a deal. Hopefully not in your own name. That's a whole nother story. Buying in your own name it's the second worst entity to use other than what we call tenants in common. But that's another story. So, but acquire it. You only get passive income when you have control over an asset.
Yep. It's interesting the names that you mentioned. Robert Allen's a friend of mine. He was one of the original OGs as well. I refer to him as an OG.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, and I've got all of his books. Nothing Down was one of the early books I read long, long time ago. That's how I figured out and understood how to buy real estate with Nothing Down. It was because of
Right.
Robert Allen. And then you mentioned Jim Rohn, who I adore and love, and I'm very good friends with Kyle, his business partner. The two of them work together to be, to put Jim on the platform.
Right.
So And so Kyle's a really good friend of mine. Um, but that's great. So, man, there's so many, as you talk and as I listen to you speak, I keep thinking of all these other things I want to talk about and bring up. And it's just, we wouldn't have time in one day to do it all. Let me transition to a little bit about your investment philosophy and maybe some advice, and then we'll dive a little bit deeper into the whole thing about studying the rich and the insights you've learned, because I think that's a very interesting concept, and really is the core topic of the day today, because we can go off in 10 different directions if we wanted to. Um, just briefly, what is your investment philosophy? I mean, I think I know, and I could probably guess, and just from everything you've just said, but did you start with one investment philosophy and did it evolve over the years, or have you always had the same investment philosophy?
I think my philosophy has been pretty steady over the years. I know there are some people out there and they're willing to make a dollar no matter what. It's all about the money. And they
Mm,
have this belief, for me to make a dollar, I have to extract a dollar from you. You're a dollar poorer, I'm a dollar richer. And that's just how it works. And if I'm smarter than you, I'll become rich, and tough luck for you. That's not my philosophy. To give an example, many property investors or would be property investors don't want to get into real estate because they think your tenants become your adversaries and you have these ongoing battles with tenants. And Marco, full disclosure, I've had my fair share of battles with tenants. I had one here in Phoenix, a tenant paying $700 a month on a residential property, and they failed to pay the rent. 5-day notice. It went to court. They turned up in court. They didn't defend themselves. Um, and there was summary judgment against them, but then they sued me for $750,000 on some spurious ground, a nonsensical statement. And I had to get a defense attorney, and they said you've got no chance of losing this. But it still took a year and resources and time and effort. So there are challenges, but for the most part, I treat my tenants not as my adversaries, but as my clients. And just like a client coming into a shop, if you make the client happy, if you treat them with respect, then they will treat you with respect. And my theory is that while tenants don't relish paying me rent, they know that if they weren't paying rent to me, they'd be paying rent to someone else. So let's make the transaction between us fun and interactive. And I think the success of my philosophy manifests itself in the longevity of my tenants, in that, well, not
mm,
longevity in terms of life terms, but how long they stay as a tenant. So on the residential side, I've got an extraordinarily long average tenancy length. It's something like 7.8 years at the moment. I track all these things.
wow,
It's easy to do. You just put the date when they first become a tenant, and if they leave, you have to put today's date in for the new tenant, right? In my
wow.
commercial realm, it's even longer. My average length of tenure for a commercial tenant is just on 11 years. That's extraordinary. And it's a matter of meeting their demands, not ridiculously. If they say, hey, Dolph, times are tough. I want you to pay for a holiday to Paris for me and my wife. That's not going to fly. But if they've got a reasonable request, we'll put it in. Or we even preempt it. We go ahead of the game by putting in improvements that benefit everyone. So, to give you an example, my commercial tenants pay their own electricity bill. That's just part of the deal. Most commercial leases are like that. They're triple net, a net of, utilities and insurance and maintenance. They pay all of that. So if I do something to decrease the electric bill, like I'll put a special paint on the building that reflects more ultraviolet light and allows infrared to radiate through, it lowers the heat load on the building. It will reduce the electricity consumption. Doesn't bother me directly, doesn't affect me. They pay the electric bill. But knowing that I've done that and it benefits them, that's an example of something where you preemptively help them out. And I think at some level they appreciate it. Not all of them. Some are indifferent. They don't care. They're making so much money, perhaps, that the electric bill doesn't really figure in their brain processing power, and good for them. But doing things like that, I think, really helps. And being responsive when they have an inquiry about something. So if you treat people like the human beings that we all are, and there but for the grace of God go I, like we could have been in reverse role positions. It's so that's, I think, a
Yeah,
very important philosophy. The
yeah.
other
I can.
thing is, many people struggle with aspects of it. I know we're touching on topics that, you're right, we could spend a whole podcast discussing them, but I want to
Yeah,
discuss another one because it's really interesting and it might help listeners. And that is, the biggest fear in the world is not the fear of some untimely death or something horrible like that. Apparently, the biggest fear is the fear of public speaking. And for
right.
those of us who've been on the stage a bit, I mean, I've a sympathy for it, but I don't have empathy because, if I turn up some, this will sound horrible, and there are 10 people in a room, I thought I'd travel all this way for 10 people. It's like, you want more, right? So that's sort of the opposite of being scared. So I don't get that. So the biggest fear is the fear of public speaking, but the second biggest fear is the fear of going to the bank to ask for money. And people always say, how can I ask for money to give me a better chance? And I've flipped that situation completely around. I tell people never, ever ask a bank for money. Because whenever you ask anyone for anything, you give them the power to say no. So I'm going to
Right.
flip the whole script around, and it's based on this. We all know that the lessee is the tenant and the lessor is the landlord. That's pretty obvious. But who's the mortgagee in a deal and who's the mortgagor? And we think, well, we go to the bank to get a mortgage. So the bank gives us the mortgage. They're the mortgagor. We get the mortgage. We're the mortgagee, right? And the answer is no, that's wrong. I mentioned before that what in America is called a foreclosure, elsewhere is called a mortgagee sale. That's a bank sale. The bank is the mortgagee. We are the mortgagor. And here's the reason why. We want to buy a property, don't have the money. The bank has the money and fortunately doesn't want to buy the property. I say fortunately because they have the money, they could buy it. So we go to the bank and we say essentially this, Mr. Bank Manager, I want to buy this property. I don't have the money. If you will lend me the money to enable me to buy the property in my name, then I will give you a pledge wherein I faithfully promise to pay interest. And at some stage in the future, depending on the type of mortgage, I'll pay back the principal. That pledge that we give them is called the mortgage. They give us the money. We give them the mortgage. So we're the mortgagor. So you don't go to a bank asking for money. I go to a bank offering them a mortgage. And I have a document that I create. It's called a proposal for finance. And it starts off with very specific wording. A mortgage is offered of 380,000 or 2.9 million, whatever it is, to be secured against a property located, etc. The income is X and percentage is Y. In addition to offering you a mortgage, I'm offering you collateral to secure the mortgage,
Yeah.
being the very property that I'm trying to buy. So I'm offering the bank something. And it's a subtle thing. You might say, well, what difference is that going to make? Well, it makes a lot of difference because instead of going there cap in hand saying, Mr. Bank Manager, would you condescend the bank, this grand bank, to considering me a mere mortal for a loan? No, you're saying, hey, I found a great deal and I want to offer you a chance to finance it. In fact, I tell people when you go to a bank, don't just print one proposal, print 10 of them and have a stack of them in your hand. And then when you get to the bank, say, oh, this
Right.
is, which bank is it, Chase? Here's your copy. Oh, excuse me, that's for Wells Fargo. Here's your copy. And odd as it sounds, they now think they're in competition. And
Right.
I've had banks say to me, Dolph, if we commit to funding this property right now, will you commit to not going to the other banks? We've turned
That's
the table.
hilarious.
So a lot of it is attitude. And it has to be based on something real. You can't make something up. But it is real that we are the mortgagee and we're the mortgagor, sorry, and the bank is the mortgagee. That's the way it is.
That's hilarious. What a great strategy. I mean, that's just almost like a classic negotiating strategy.
It
It's
kind
so
of is. And that's what I
yeah,
love about real estate too. It's not just cranking a handle with the same silly thing every day. You
yeah,
can use your creativity. And it's
yeah,
again your people skills. It's a matter of being confident but not arrogant. There's a fine line between them. And we see
yeah,
plenty of evidence out there in the world of people who are just arrogant, and that doesn't fly in any
yeah,
realm of life.
yeah. Interesting. Um, Man, I can go off on so many tangents. Let's kind of circle back a little bit to, your insights and study of the rich. What, I mean, you can go as deep as you like on this, but I'm just curious, what insights have you learned over time from studying the rich and rich people? I kind of differentiate rich and wealthy. I don't know if that makes a difference in how you want to answer the question. I mean, rich just, to me is just someone sitting on a pile of cash, whether they earned it or not. They're just cash rich. To me, wealth is more about time. It's the sustainability of you having passive income forever, like indefinitely, and that just creates a form of financial wealth. So you don't necessarily, you can be rich but not wealthy, and you can be wealthy and not being rich. But that's how I differentiate it in my mind. But I'm curious what you've learned in studying the rich.
Well, I fully agree with you. There are many people who seem on the surface to be rich, and that is the image they want to project. They drive the latest car, they have immaculate clothes, they always have an expensive watch on their wrist. And if they see you wearing, oh, what kind is it? What brand is it, or something? Whereas a $40, I don't want to name a brand in case I'm considered favorite. Well, it doesn't matter. Swatch and Tissot and all that. $40 watch, it tells the time just as well. Quartz watch technology is so advanced now that they're pretty accurate. And if you get one of these digital watches, they're hooked into the satellite time system and they're accurate to the last second all the
Right.
time. So if you like wearing an expensive watch because you personally like the look of it and the feel of it and the way it makes you feel good, but too many people do things to impress others. And we always say they buy things they don't need with money they don't have to impress people they don't know. And one of my observations is when you get to hang with the ultra rich, they don't wear designer clothes. They don't have, any fancy exotic car that they roar around in with a loud exhaust to impress people. I don't get it. And a manifestation of this, I think, is when young men in particular, men are particularly prone to this desire. They'll have a car with a loud exhaust and they'll have music so loud that even with the windows shut, I can hear it in my car. So the boom, boom is vibrating through their windows. It comes through the air to my car with its closed windows, and it penetrates my car. And I think they think it's a babe magnet. And yet, invariably, when I see a car with a loud exhaust and usually low and very darkly tinted windows and really loud music, there's no babe in the passenger seat, sort of thing. So even that theory, I don't think works. Um, so the trick is with rich people, I have it myself. And when I get enough money together to replace my car, and full disclosure, I drive a Lexus. It's the ultra luxury version of the Lexus, and it's from 2004. It's got leather seats and the walnut wood grain panel. It's a V8. It still drives beautifully. Before electric vehicles became the norm, kind of, and it was the quietest car on the road. And it still serves me well. The number of my friends who mock me for having an old car, surely, Dolph, you can upgrade your car. And Marco, I'd like a new car. I don't know if you've sat inside the Lucid. They're particularly nice. They've got a long range for electric vehicles. But my concern there is, will they be around in 5 years' time? And I know my critics will say, well, you replace it after 2 years. People spend more time, most American males spend more time every 2 years studying consumer reports and auto
Yeah.
magazines to figure out which new car they're going to get, how many brake horsepower, how many Newton meters of torque, and how long does it take to go from naught to. They spend days and days poring over these things and weeks deciding on the next car. And yet they don't spend 5 minutes buying their first investment property that will feed them for the rest of their lives. So the point I didn't finish making is when I get $70,000 or $80,000 together, enough to replace that car, I think, well, that would be nice, a new car. And then I think, but that's also the down payment on a property that will generate passive income forever,
Yeah.
indexed for inflation. Um, so I think when you look at those things, when I look at the average family all over the world, this is not just an American thing, all over the Western world, when they retire, you know that 60% of people can't put their hands on $25,000 cash.
Yeah.
That's And for most of them, not all, but for most of them, their biggest asset is their home that they live in. And it wasn't even an investment. They needed a place to live, right? And you'll
Yeah.
often hear them lament, if only we'd bought the place next door when it was on the market. Remember, honey, when the grass was really tall and the paint was fading, we said, we hope someone buys that old dunger because it looks horrible. It degrades the value. We should have bought it. If only they'd bought that one. If only they'd bought five more, they would have been financially free. So
Yeah.
part of my mission and yours too is to get people to realize that all these fancy things we show people to show how rich we are, they are not as important as just having some passive income. And then once you get to a certain level, the desire to show off your wealth sort of diminishes. In fact, if anything, you don't want to flaunt it. You want to just be a little bit more circumspect, a little bit more low key, off the radar, not because you're doing anything nefarious. And relate to that, and coming back to mindset, I love the story of two guys who are mowing the lawn on a sunny Saturday morning, and they're neighbors. And they're mowing the lawn, and they take a break halfway through, and they're leaning over the fence, and they motion up to the young Asian immigrant family up the road who had the same size home, but they built a two-bedroom extension on their home, and they've got three foreign cars in the driveway. And one of the neighbors said to the other, I wonder if he's in drugs. And that question, I wonder if he's in drugs, says nothing about our Asian friends up the road. It says everything about the mindset of the two neighbors, because their mindset is, I'm honest, I'm kind, I'm diligent, I work hard, I have a job, I support my family, I work hard, and I can't afford a two-bedroom extension on my house, nor those three exotic cars. So in order for him to do that, he must be doing something illegal. He must be in drugs. And it's that very mindset that holds them back from doing better because they think they have to stay with their job. But the truth is, you use your job to justify getting mortgages and then invest in real estate. And if you buy just one property a year for 5 years, at the end of 5 years, you're financially free. You can give up your job and then you can start building that extension. And that's why we can't judge anyone on anything. And one of the things I love about America is that it is a melting pot of all these different races
Mhm.
and attitudes and backgrounds. But we're also very quick to criticize. Well, that's odd. They eat with not a knife and a fork. That's what,
Yeah.
instead of that, we should try it. Go to one of these ethnic restaurants and try eating with your hands, try eating with chopsticks, try eating with anything.
Yeah.
And you don't have to like it, but just experience it. Because by doing things differently, you might stumble across a new way of succeeding in this passive game.
So to my question about, insights you've learned about studying the rich people, is what you're saying basically mindset? Like mindset is a significant part of why the rich are rich?
Absolutely. It's not just that you need a slightly different mindset to get rich, it's that when you observe the rich, they operate from a slightly different mindset. And that
Can you
they're not
describe
rich.
that? Can you kind of describe it a little bit for people who are not familiar with, like, what is the mindset that they have that I should be in?
Yep. So they're willing to forego current pleasure in order to have long term gains. So,
Mm.
don't just when you've got enough money together, go on that trip or buy that car or have that, whatever it is you want, fancy stuff. Getting an 85-inch LCD TV. I know they're getting cheaper and cheaper, so it's harder for me to say you shouldn't get a TV. But I do often tell people if you want to do really well in life, take your TV and toss it out the window. If you want to save some money, I'm all for saving money. Open the window first, but get rid of the TV. And full disclosure, Michael, I do have a TV, but look, weeks go by that I don't turn it on because I think that TV at some level does rot the brain. It is a scriptwriter's fantasy, all these programs, to lure us in to watch long enough so that we stay there for the ads because that's how they make their money. If they show that
Oh.
enough people have watched the ads and they can get revenue. So, a way of looking at it is when you get on a plane, it's not universally true, but in general, it's true. In the back of the plane, in the economy class, people are watching movies and they're playing games and all that sort of thing. And then in the middle of the plane, in the business class, they're reading magazines. And in the front of the plane, in first class, there's a large predominance of people reading books. And I don't think there's a one-to-one correlation between watching movies and being poor and reading books and being rich. Not at all. There are, we can give examples of where this isn't true. But in general, people who have done very well are avid readers. And that's why I'll say one of the attitudes that the rich have is they're willing to read. And it comes back to what you said way at the beginning, Marco. It's just another way of saying we've got to educate ourselves. You educate yourself by reading a book in general, whereas by watching a movie, you entertain yourself. And there's so much shock and horror and murder and mayhem on movies these days that often they don't enlighten you. They don't give you an idea of, man, I could adapt that to get an extra bit of passive income. Whereas by reading a book, you can. Again, you spend that same $30 in 3 hours reading a biography. By reading a biography, whether it's an autobiography or written by someone else, you can condense the essence of someone's entire life into 3 hours and pick out all the good bits. Why would you not read biographies? And yet most people don't. Book readership
Yeah.
has gone down in the last 15 years. We've gone from 46,000 bookstores down to just over 6,000. And the numbers are still dropping. We aren't reading anymore. We're obsessed with social media and just scrolling. And again, a lot of that is useful. There's some good to that. But there's also a lot of misinformation, disinformation, or sheer nonsense. Um, so I think the rich have developed this knack of learning more to better themselves and others. And it's that old thing, it's a Zig Ziglarism. You can get whatever you want in this world as long as you help enough other people get what they want. And so what you're doing with podcasts, what I've done, with doing events around the world and writing books is you help other people. And the more you have this propensity to help and show other people how it's done, the more you learn. They say that if you really want to understand a subject, you've got to teach it. Because in teaching it, you'll expand your mind even more and absorb
Hmm.
more. And when I have an event and I've got 1,000 people there, it's true, I'm the one doing most of the talking. I'm the nominal teacher. But I learn a little bit from the audience, even when they don't speak, but I can tell from their reaction whether an idea goes down well or not. Or they come up with examples. I put on an event recently and someone talked about getting a piece of land and he parked his own RV on it just to park it somewhere. It was, I think, a third of an acre. And then he started getting phone calls from people saying, can I park my RV there as well? And at first he said, okay, $30 a month. And then he thought, that's so cheap. So he made it $50 a month. And before long, he'd filled this third of an acre with RVs and he turned it into an RV park, highly profitable. And he now buys odd bits of land that no one else can see a use for, or they don't have the money to develop it by building it. And he rents it out as RV space. And he's doing extraordinary. I'd never thought of that. I don't own an RV. I've no particular desire. So I probably would never have thought of it. But had I not put on that event, I wouldn't have come across this idea. So the more you're willing to share, and I think the rich have figured this out too, if you're willing to share things, the more that comes back to you. It embodies what Zig Ziglar said and the philosophy that you talk about. All of it is interrelated. That's the other thing. Successful people, you've probably heard this, but it's so true. Successful people don't do one thing 100% differently. They do 100 things 1% differently. And the rich tend to do the same thing slightly differently. They're not as showy as you might expect them to be. They're willing to share, information. They read a lot. They've always got 2 or 3 books on the boil. They tend not to watch much TV. If you ask them about the latest soap or hit series or something, I haven't watched any of them. I mean, I'm ostracized by some friends because I never knew. I can't even think of the names. The Gold something. Oh no, Game of Thrones. I haven't watched a single episode. Sometimes I wish I had that I could at least participate in the conversation. I find excessive consumption of alcohol is not that great amongst the rich. They might have a wine with a meal, but they tend not to get schlossel. Like, there'll be exceptions, I'm sure. But they're too focused on having fun and other things. They don't need alcohol as an escape from anything because they're
Mm.
focused on their mission, which is generating more passive income.
You
So
you 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 answered a question I want to ask you, and I'm going to ask it anyway. I was going to ask you, what are the biggest things, or maybe even one? What is the biggest thing the rich do and don't do? I mean, it could be one thing, it could be two, three things. You've partially answered that, maybe completely answered that. Because you rattle off a list here of things like TV, books, and whatever else. But um, is it fair to ask you the question still? Like, what are the biggest things the rich do and don't do?
Well, it is, but I think you're right. That my answer is not that it's one thing. I mean, if I said that rich people wore blue, and if only everyone would wear blue, then you'd all be rich. If that
Yeah,
were the truthful answer, the reality, then I'd share it. I don't think it is that. As I said, they don't do one thing completely differently. They do 100 things slightly differently. They
yeah,
speak respectfully, and they have integrity. And to highlight that is if you and I decided after this podcast to go out and rob a bank, then we could be rich instantly, assuming we didn't get caught. No, I'm serious, and we should consider it. But the challenge for you and I with robbing a bank is that we need a few helpers. We need a couple of lookouts, and we need a getaway driver. And where do we recruit those people from? Do we recruit them from the ranks of those with integrity or from the ranks of those without integrity? Well, the answer is without integrity. So when you and I come out of the bank hauling bags of loot and we throw it in the trunk of our getaway vehicle, our newly acquired friend, the getaway driver, he hits that accelerator before you and I have a chance to get in the car because he figures he can split the proceeds with fewer people. So my point is, if you lack integrity and use that to get rich, then you hang with people and you won't stay rich. So the rich have integrity. And as I said way at the beginning, you can change your attitude to that in a heartbeat. And to the extent that you keep your word more and you turn up on time and you do what you say, you're going to attract kinds of people that also do that. And successful people, believe it or not, they do turn up on time and they do say what they're going to do. That's how they became successful.
yeah.
So a lot of it is an attitude more than an action or what you wear or what kind of a car you drive or what house you live in. They're secondary. It's having an attitude of excellence. If you want to do well, if you don't compare yourself with others, compare yourself with how you were yesterday. And can you do a bit better?
Very,
That's
very
where it
well said.
counts.
Yeah, I love that. Compare
Yeah.
yourself to how you were yesterday, not to other people.
Right. You
That's
will
that's pr-
always find people smarter than you, dumber than you, quicker than you, slower than you, taller than you, shorter than you, fatter than you, skinnier. That's not important. It's if you're not happy with any of those, that you can do things to change them. You can change how you appear in terms of intelligence by doing things that raise your awareness and your general knowledge. Read more books, in other words, is one way.
Yeah.
Hang with people of high intelligence. There's that saying that, you are the average of the 5 people you hang with most. So if you're not happy with your level of income, maybe you're hanging with people who just don't care about income. They just want to get drunk on the weekend and be
Yeah.
sober enough to turn up for work on Monday, whereas you have a
Yeah.
name of not having a work to go to.
Yeah. Sadly, I know some of those people.
Yes.
So to tie it back to real estate, what have you found is the connection between wealth and property? I mean, clearly everybody intuitively knows there's a connection there because the more property you own, theoretically you should have greater wealth. But is it more than that? Is there a different
Yes.
type of connection?
Yeah. The biggest thing that I can think of is creativity. And the truly wealthy in real estate have been very creative, because if owning real estate was the only thing you needed to do, then any fool with a certain lump of cash in their pocket could go out and buy something and then sit on the beach reading books or watching people go by and become wealthy. But those who are creative can do so much better. And one of the
Mm,
things I love about real estate, one of the four things, we probably don't have time to go into all of them, but one of them is that when you buy a piece of real estate, there are so many things you can do to massively increase its value without spending much money. You can't do, when you buy a stock, when you buy $100,000 worth of IBM stock or Hewlett Packard or whatever, um, you can't do anything to increase the value other than hope and pray and write letters of encouragement to the directors of the company. That's how you do anything, right? But when you buy a piece of real estate, oh my gosh, you can remodel the bathroom. You can, paint the house. Spending $2,000 painting a house can increase its value by 20,000. And if you don't believe that, and you've never made 20,000 in a weekend, then change what you're doing this coming weekend. Um, and I'm always one to put my money where my mouth is, Marco. So I so believe that there are 101 ways of massively increasing the value of your real estate without spending money that I wrote a book about it. I've got one here. It's called 101 Ways to Massively Increase the Value of Your Real Estate Without Spending Much Money. It's the longest title on Amazon. And, again, you're limited only by your imagination. And you can have the really cheap things like changing a $3 40-watt light bulb into a 150-watt light bulb, or whatever the equivalent is in LED these days. The room can seem bigger, brighter, fresher, and cleaner, and it will rent more readily. It will sell more readily. That's the
mm,
cheapest idea I can come with. And if you're really cheap, that 40-watt bulb that you took out, it still works. You can use it somewhere else, right? That's an aside. But we have other ideas where we've turned $20 into 2 million overnight. And if you think that's impossible, then you're limiting your beliefs. And I don't know if we've got time. We're probably rapidly running out of
go ahead.
sharing that.
No, go
Well,
ahead.
so full disclosure, the $20 was spent on a bucket of paint and a brush. And how do we turn that into 2 million overnight? It sounds too good to be true, right? Well, I have to set the scene. It was in Jakarta, which is the capital of Indonesia, and it's known as being the most congested city on this planet. You measure how far it is to your destination, not in terms of kilometers or miles, but in terms of how many hours it's going to take you to get there. So the CBD, the Central Business District of Jakarta, to get to the airport, Soekarno-Hatta International, it should be a 45-minute drive with no traffic. But because of traffic, it might take 3 hours, it might take 6 hours. So the CEO of a company in this commercial building we had, if he had a 9 a.m. board meeting, he could not book a 2 p.m. flight. So what did we do? We took this bucket of paint and the brush and went onto the roof of the building. It was a flat concrete roof. And I painted a big white circle. And in the middle, I painted the letter H. And I turned it into a helipad. And I know, full disclosure, we had to get Civil Aviation Authority approval. It's like the FAA to run helicopters out of there and all kinds of other regulatory requirements. But we got that. So now the ride to the airport was 15 minutes. And the rental, when you convert it from Indonesian rupiah per square meter to US dollars per foot, it was about $14 a foot. But by having the helipad there, we could raise it to $16 a foot. Many of the tenants thought they'd probably never use it, but they had bragging rights, and others thought, yeah, we could use it. So the value went up by $2 a foot. There was about 100,000 square feet of space. So the rental, the annual rent went up by 200,000 a year. And at a cap rate of 10%, the value of the building went up by 2 million. Bingo. So it's
Wow.
being creative. And to answer your question, I find that the wealthy tend to be very creative. They come up with ideas that other people haven't thought of. And
Yeah.
how do you come up with ideas? You travel and you observe. I've brought back so many ideas from other parts of the world that I've deployed here in the US. And similarly, I've brought ideas that I see here in the US and taken them overseas. And so we have to travel more. America has this dubious distinction of being the Western nation with the lowest uptake of passports in the world. Now, I understand there's no need to travel here. It's so big, there's so much variety here, but travel overseas, savor other things, other foods, other languages, and you never learn less.
That's incredible. That's a crazy story, but it makes so much sense. I mean, really, when you think about it, you just increase the value of the property, and if you can charge more rent, on a commercial property, and you've got a 10% cap rate, you just can leverage. It's massively increasing the value of that real estate. That's
Right,
incredible. I
right.
love it. So as we kind of wind things down here, like we can go on for hours, it seems, about all of this stuff. Um, I'm just curious, how do you balance risk and reward when you're making your investing decisions? Do you have a methodology or a philosophy or anything when it comes to balancing the risk and reward of what you look at?
Well, I don't have strict criteria like the return has to be at least 7.3 and the occupancy rate has to be at least 89%. The remaining lease length has to be on average at least that. I think that's too rigid because finding one property that meets all those criteria is pretty rare. But
Yeah,
because I think differently, which I encourage everyone to do, and I encourage everyone to be more creative, I can find deals that other people can't make work. So in the case of the building in Jakarta, we lifted its value by 2 million. But there are many instances where other people can't make a deal work, and you have to be creative. I'll give you a morbid example. I came across a funeral parlor. It had been vacant for 3 years. No one could figure out what to do with it. And my philosophy is not to buy it and hope that I can find a tenant, because remember, a commercial property without a tenant is worth a negative amount because you still have to pay property tax and insurance and
right.
everything. So what I did is I employed someone at the then going hourly rate of $8 an hour to phone every funeral director going further and further away from this location until she found someone who said, "Oh yes, I've always wanted to operate there." And that's when I got on the phone. And so I said, "Listen, the building's for sale." I hadn't bought it yet full. I was honest with him. I didn't try to hoodwink him. I said, "If you want to buy it, go ahead. But if not, then I'm an investor and I need a tenant before I can buy." He said, "No, I don't want to buy real estate. I don't know that. I don't have the money." He looked at it. He said, "I love it." I said, "Well, if you sign this LOI, a letter of intent, where subject to me buying it, you will become the tenant, then I'm willing to have a crack at buying it." And he said, "Well, not so fast, Sonny Jim. I'll only do it if you give me a long-term lease." Well, that's music to my ears. And Marco, I would have been happy with a 5 year lease, but one of my 8 golden rules in one of my books is never be the first to name a figure. So I
Right.
said, "Well, how long would you want?" And he said, "Well, I'd want 10 years with a right of renewal for another 10 years. And so I said, "We've got a deal." But again, I thought differently. For 3 years, the owner and the agents in that city couldn't find a buyer. And all it took is someone, I'd spent 2 days, that's 16 hours at $8 an hour. That's $128, which is tax deductible. And yet the 20-year lease that he signed up for was indexed for inflation. I mean,
That's
so
crazy.
it took $128 of tax deductible money to find a 20-year tenant. It's just thinking differently.
Yeah, that's it. It's thinking differently. I mean, it's what Steve Jobs said, and it's also there's a book written with I think the exact same title. One of the things I learned a long time ago, many years ago, from one of my early mentors in the marketing space was one of the biggest things that make you money is innovation. So if
Right,
you can think creatively and innovate, that not always, but that's what leads to significant returns, increased cash flow, increased wealth, you name it. So
right,
pretty
right.
powerful. So let's wrap up with one question here. A lot of my listeners are either new, like newbie, haven't bought a first property, or they're getting started. They have one, two, maybe three properties, but certainly less than five. Of course, there's many listeners that listen to the show that have 10, 20, 50 properties. What advice would you give someone who's either just starting out, no properties, or just a few properties? They're just starting out with their real estate investing journey or career today.
Well, one of the things I would say, Marco, is that if we can imbue in these people this notion that, oh my gosh, I'm onto something good, then that's great. And I always like to give things away. So I talked about this book, 101 Ways. You cannot, I mean, no one, including you, but your listeners cannot read this book without coming across 10 or 12 or 15 ideas that they can apply right now to the properties they may have already. Or if they're looking at buying their first property, they say, yeah, that wasn't so good in this area. But now I've got ideas as to what I can do. So I'm willing to give a free copy of this book to anyone who wants it. I've got a URL where they can go. It's called Dolph Gift, DOLFGIFT.com, dolphgift.com. You go there and we'll get you a free copy of this book. I guarantee you, you will not be able to not find an idea that you can deploy straight away. And as I say, the cheapest ones are about $3 to deploy. The greatest lift we had, I've got the helicopter idea in here, is a $2 million lift, but even that only cost $20. I mean, these things are so simple. And often people, when they hear these things, they say, Dolph, but that's too easy. Is it really that easy? And the answer is yes, it is. You know, the reason why today's people do things that their parents never dreamt of doing is that their parents didn't dream of doing them. You've just got to, and that's why I think listening to your podcast is so valuable for people, because every time you get an idea of, hey, I never thought of that. And that's why we interact with other people. If you are born somewhere and abandoned in a jungle and somehow you manage to survive, and it's actually happened with people that they grow up in an environment of, orangutans or something like that, you don't learn anything. You don't learn about passive income. You don't learn the meaning of passive. You don't learn the meaning of income. So what we know already is from our surroundings. And all that people like you and I do is we teach people how to make that even better.
Yeah, very true. Well, that's a great gift. I appreciate you offering that. We'll make sure we put that link in the show notes and let people know about it. So I guess in wrapping up, tell our listeners how they can find you, follow you, get more information, learn more about what you're doing in your world these days.
It's pretty easy. I'm very easy to find. I've got a unique name. My first name is Dolph, DOLF. The last name is DeRoos, DEROOS. So I'm on social media, usually under Dolph DeRoos, REI, Real Estate Investor. So Dolph DeRoos, REI. I'm on TikTok. I'm on Instagram, Facebook. I've got a website, dolphderoos.com. And one way to get started, if you want to get a free copy of this book, you can read it later on today if you act in time, is simply to go to dolphgift, DOLFGIFT.com, and we'll get you a copy of that book. I think we've got the audio and a written version that you can have. So whatever your preferred style of listening is, we cater to that. And yeah, just know that you can do this. It's not beyond difficulty. Again, compared with a PhD in electrical engineering, it's trivial, but it's far more lucrative and it's a lot of fun. You've got to have the attitude of fun too. I always say, Marco, if you can't put your head down on your pillow at night and say, wow, what a blast today, and I'm looking forward to tomorrow, then do something differently. It comes back to, do things differently. Because life is here, we don't know what comes afterwards. It's very short. Enjoy it every moment and generate some passive income so that you can do things with people and do things for people.
I agree. Well, Dolph, this has been a real pleasure. You have very interesting and entertaining stories. You're a wealth of knowledge. You've got all kinds of great books. You're one of the OGs in the industry. I appreciate you coming on. So thank you for taking the time, and hopefully you'll come back on the show anytime you like.
Absolutely, it'll be my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you for what you do for the community of investors and would-be investors out there. I think at some level we are making a difference and making this a better place for everyone. So I appreciate you as well. Thank you for your gracious words, and I look forward to our next interaction.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. Yeah, you're welcome back anytime. So thanks for your time. Well, just hang tight there, Dolph. Just in wrapping up here, this has been an incredible interview. I wish I could go for another hour, but I have to respect everybody's time. But that is it for today. Remember, we have a team of investment counselors. If you have questions or want to just explore the opportunities with real estate investing, we're here to help. Just contact my team. Remember to subscribe if you haven't done so already. And that is it for today. Thank you for listening. We will see you all on our next episode.